Hello. I'd like to talk about the topic of content creation, singing your song, so to speak, giving your message, telling your story, any which way you would like to put it, and the associated concerns about how to package it, how to market it, how to get a good editor, how to get a good cover designer, making sure that there's no noise in the background, making sure that you're not repetitive and that you are following all the dictates of grammar and punctuation, no typos, etc., etc., etc. What's behind all of this and what's the impact of all this advice? I'll tell you what the impact has been on me. It's been to make me quash what I would like to say sometimes of what I deem of value. Because I'm always wondering, well, maybe I need to get an editor, maybe I need to polish this up more, maybe I need to, again, not be repetitive, maybe I need to optimize it a lot more before the audiences, so to speak, anybody, in fact, will be receptive to it. And before they would, quote unquote, pay money for it, praise me, who knows what. But I've run into some curious statistics and comments from shall we say, millionaires per year, from people who have achieved certain notoriety as per making millions of dollars per year in content creation or through life coaching, say. I've heard some interesting comments that go like this. First, one man who sells advice now on how to create courses of considerable cost to a customer, and who has created more than 100 of them himself, has said the average person doesn't read past 18 pages in a book. Another man, Stephen James of Project Life Mastery, has said only 10% of those who buy a Kindle book even open the Kindle book, so to speak, that they purchase it. By the way, many of them created with, quote, good editors and good cover designers, and yet only 10% of these books are even opened. Also, in a video once, a man was talking about having written a book on finance, and I don't know how or why or what's about it, but he had said most books on finance aren't worth the paper they're written on. And yet another example, when I was obtaining some quote-unquote conventional therapy many years ago, the social worker who had a quote master's degree and was of Mexican descent and who grew up in the projects, so to speak. This individual told me that in his opinion, most books in the library aren't worth consulting. So when you look at all these people talking, and even in the book of Solomon, when it is said that there's way too many books, so to speak, or reading of books. And when you consider also that the Native American Indians could only carry as much written material as would go on a horseback, basically. Or when you consider that Abraham Lincoln basically only read a couple books, the Bible and maybe a few others like Blackstone Commentary, and had to walk 18 miles each direction to borrow some law books while training for the law. And other people never went to school at all, basically, like, Mr. Carnegie, once a very, very wealthy man, if not the wealthiest in the world, relatively speaking. He had, a fifth grade education, I believe. And on and on and on. So then my returning to this concept of how many people, perhaps myself included, especially in the past, restricting ourselves as to what we might say because we're concerned about it being polished enough before it's received or received well. Maybe in part because we've seen many books, even of a polished nature, go nowhere. You might say flop. Well, why would that be? When in contrast, if you looked at the book, the autobiography by a notorious, so to speak, person, Popcorn Sutton, once a very famous moonshiner, arguably the last legal one, or the last great moonshiner in general, with quite a notoriety. I looked him up a month or two ago to see if I could obtain his autobiography, and guess what? On Amazon, there was a copy available, $1,800, and it was a kind of a bedraggled copy in spiral form, maybe just typewritten with no cover, no editor, no nothing, basically. So, what gives? Why would it cost $1,800? With no editor, probably quite repetitive, typos, who knows? And almost printed on toilet paper, you might say, relatively speaking, and in spiral binding. You have to wonder here. Additionally, I've referred to this before to certain people, if not in some audios or videos or even books. Why is the Christian's Bible or scriptures, as found in the Gideon edition, say in every hotel room almost or motel room in America today, why does it typically always have a black cover with some gold print that says the Holy Bible, perhaps? This violating every rule in the book concerning getting a good cover designer who went to college, say, several years for training in this discipline, graphic arts, what have you. And, why does the Bible also have rather a questionable table of contents other than the names of the books in the Bible, which tells you nothing basically of the contents of each book in the Bible or chapter? In other words, can you imagine buying a book today in general and the table of contents says only chapter 1, chapter 2 through chapter 66, basically, if my memory serves me correct, that maybe there's 66 books in the Bible. We would find that in violation of typical standards on how to publish. Not to mention, there's lots of digressing and words that are vague and repetitious in general. And I'm not even talking about possible content problems as to certain premises being incorrect, perhaps, here and there, or clashes in content as per a truth given, but maybe a misconception given here, the opposite part, so to speak. And of course, the words of Jesus, if we can ascribe certain words as definitely coming from him and not altered at a later point in time in some fashion, I don't believe Jesus got a good cover designer or a good PR man or did marketing, so to speak, or hired a marketing expert or got on the internet and used social media to market his message. Maybe this ties into, too, how many people would be ridiculed if they say they want to write the next great American novel, because there probably aren't that many great American novels relative to the number of novels written. So all of this starts to add up in my mind and make me wonder just what's going on here. Yes, maybe a good cover designer, a good marketing expert, good editor might be quite useful if we're selling something average or something basically what I would call not transformative. maybe that's what I have to focus on here now. This concept, is the material, the content, transformative, or is it simply eyebrow-raising, distractive, or maybe tweaks our curiosity, as we might say? But it isn't transformative in the sense that maybe the Christian faith starting about 2,000 years ago was arguably transformative to a certain degree. Some might question just how, but it certainly made quite a mark quite quickly when it started. And arguably it came from Jesus, or the influences upon him, and what I would call the network called Jesus. Now, of course, I wouldn't restrict certain transformative influences one way or the other, or of a mixed nature, just to Christianity. There have been other forces in history, too. Other great religions, other great social forces, other great economic models, political models, so on. But the idea being, what is transformative versus what is simply transitory or fluff, what is distractive, what is basically any number of millions of the same thing, only color-coded a different way. Like maybe when you pick a paint out from an interior decorator to paint your living room, and they offer you a color swatch, and maybe they have 500 different colors you can buy. But does that mean one color is transformatively different than any other color in most respects? I don't think so. They're all basically variations on what you call paint, and paint is not transformative. I'm reminded, too, of how some have said marketing is quite necessary, in part because maybe a lot of people think they've designed a better mousetrap, and that this in and of itself, once discovered, would take off like hotcakes. Or the example often given, too, that it's fallacious to think you could build what is talked of in that one movie, The Field of Dreams with Kevin Costner, a baseball field in a cornfield in Iowa, and that it would be so fantastic that people would flock to it because it's so big, so different, so transformative compared to what presently existed or exists. That the notion is thus that maybe it's said that maybe people over-evaluate the significance of their creations and thus think they've created a better mousetrap when they haven't. Maybe the number of mousetraps that are quite different, quite transformative in nature, thus, even to the mouse itself, suddenly, quite instantly perhaps, are quite few in number. And maybe we need to examine more what the components are of something that's transformative and what went into the person who created, in fact, the transformative mousetrap or message or book or whatever, great American novel, whatever you define it term-wise to be. Why are there so few Jesuses? Why are there so few great religious leaders, so few Gandhis, so few, leaders of any sort that are standing out head and shoulders above the rest? Great Lincolns, for instance. Why only every 100 years, every 500 years, every 2,000 years? Why only a few Leonardo da Vinci's? I don't believe their brains were 10 times the size of anyone else, Einstein included. I don't believe any race, any faith in general has a lock on knowledge. So what is it that went into this better mousetrap, so to speak, whether it's a religion, political force, leader? I find it quite a fascinating question. Once again, I don't necessarily believe it's much at all a matter of genetics or genetic freakishness, shall we say. I don't believe it's necessarily at all so-called divine intervention, acting only very rarely. I don't believe in it being spontaneous combustion either, shall we say, or thus a stroke of luck coming out of nowhere. I think there have to be reasons in this cause and effect universe. Only for certain reasons we don't tend to seem to be able to come up with what has actually gone on here. But I would say there have been a very few people, say in physics, who wanted to make a transformative change in the whole field by, say, pursuing what they call a God equation, where they would define the whole of reality in one mathematical equation and call it the God equation, or what I would call maybe a transformative concept stated very simply about reality in mathematical form, where before it was quite murky, took books and books, and took a lot of effort to describe. I read, for instance, a biography on Einstein maybe 5 years ago for the second time, and for the first time many, many years ago. I'm not sure I got anything out of it as to what really made Einstein Einstein. There was talk, for instance, of what he liked to do, or how he started to create certain things by teenage years, or maybe even age 12, but there was really very little, if any, information as to what made him who he was. Earlier in life, we're left to speculate whether his brain was very large, comparatively speaking to most, or whether there was something freakishly genetic about the nerve endings in the brain, or what have you. I'm not sure. I've only read, of course, that one book on Einstein. Maybe someone has given a much better treatment of his early childhood, shall we say, in the sense that there have been some admirable books, perhaps, upon what we would call a transformative effect in the negative direction by some, what we would call mass murderers, whether we're talking Mr. Hitler or some others, and delving into the psychological roots, so to speak, or the parental roots or sociological roots as to what made a transformative person in the opposite sense, shall we say. I don't believe it being basically genetic or a matter of brain size. I'd leave with one last comment. I met a woman a couple months ago of about 25 years of age studying at a 2-year institution in my state and region. And she had told me that she would like to move out of the area and attend studies in forensic medicine to try and understand what makes mass murderers. And she wanted to study their brains after their death, dissecting them and studying them under a microscope to see what makes what I would call person of transformative effect in the negative direction. But she was attempting it in terms of examining biology, as opposed to understanding it from a different direction, either parental abuse or sociological factors, or maybe just a whole bunch of circumstances come together in a very freakish combination in terms of prevalence level, how frequently it happens. I think, sadly, we all too often would like a simple solution and say, well, we just can't understand, or maybe it's divine intervention, or maybe spontaneous combustion, so to speak, like a fire starting out of nowhere, or maybe it's a matter of I'm not sure. My mind digresses here, but maybe it's a matter of genetics, we might say, with no special emphasis thereafter, or maybe we would even say it's something of an abnormality in the brain, like holes in the brain, ventricle enlargement, or maybe we would say it's a matter of child abuse only. I think all of these would dodge what is probably a more complex issue here, and we want simply a quick bullet solution approach and say it's only this or that, only child abuse, only genetics, only one thing, as opposed to maybe something quite complex that makes something what you might call a frog with 6 legs, which does happen very unusually, but it can happen. These are my thoughts then on this matter, and I hope they stimulate some thought.